Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Vani Narula, Associate Professor, Department of Social Work, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. In this EPG Pathshala, we will discuss monitoring and evaluation and community engagement. The learning outcomes for this particular module. After completion of this module, you shall be able to, number 1, define monitoring and evaluation. Number 2, know the relationship between monitoring and evaluation. Number 3, list the steps in monitoring and evaluation. And number 4, understand community engagement in monitoring and evaluation. Introduction. Monitoring. Monitoring is a process of collecting information about an ongoing task, goal, project or program so that you know where it is at the time of inquiry or to assess and analyze its progress, that is, to know how far you have the objectives, how far they have been achieved, at which stage are the activities, what are the beneficiary status, how much monies have been spent, what are the roadblocks, if any, etc. While the task, goal, project, organization or program is going on or in operation. This is done concurrently while the task, goal, project, organization or program is going on. This is a process activity. Evaluation. This is the end task, goal, project or program assessment which is done after the task, goal, project, organization or program is over. It is retrospective in nature. This is a terminal activity. It can be periodic. Though these are two different exercises, we club them together because they have similar goals. They help us to find out whether the tasks, goals, projects or programs that we set out to do are in the direction of our desired outcomes. That is, are we making the change that we set out as a target for ourselves? Monitoring and evaluation, that is ME, helps us to, number 1, assess and demonstrate our effectiveness in achieving our tasks, goals, projects or programs. It improves task, goal, project or program implementation by making us familiar with the barriers and success factors that give us insight into how the group operates and which approaches work, which don't, and in the whole program implementation. Further, M&E help us to empower and motivate volunteers and supporters. It helps to provide accountability to key stakeholders like your community members, members of your program, your supporters, the wider movement, funders and other supporters. M&E also helps to provide the basis to influence government policy, helps us to share our learnings with other communities and contributes to the evidence base about effectiveness and limits of community action. Principles guiding M&E. According to Monitoring and Evaluation for Sustainable Communities, funded by Higher Education Innovation Fund at the University of Oxford, M&E or information collected for M&E should be focused and feasible in relation to your available resources so that it supports rather than diverts resources from action. That is, make sure you focus information collection on what you need to know and not on what is nice to know. Useful and timely information to improve group learning, group decision making and project design. Usable by and or comparable to data collected by other stakeholders, so it contributes to the wider evidence base. Credible, valid and reliable to the extent possible within your available resources. Sensitive to unequal power relations when you collect information. That is, Ensure that you listen to people who might be marginalized in the community or do not have a strong voice. Ethical, for example, in relation to data consent and protection. Essentials for M&E. The first essential is decide which program or projects you need to monitor. It is important to decide and prioritize the programs or projects you will monitor, as it is unlikely you will have the resources to monitor all your interventions at the same time. So you need to think about which programs or projects you want to assess, over what period of time, and whether it is an ongoing activity which requires monitoring or a completed activity which requires evaluation. Second essential, decide who to involve in the different stages of your M&E. To ensure M&E it is relevant to your stakeholders, it is important that you consider their information needs as well as your own. You will therefore need to identify the key internal and external stakeholders and decide how to involve them in the design, implementation, analysis and/or communication of findings. Examples of people you might want to include are people directly involved in your projects, stakeholders in your wider community, geographic or interest based, such as specific groups of residents, specific networks, community groups, the wider movement and/or external stakeholders, for example funders, local and national policy makers. It might also be possible to work in partnership with university departments. The third essential is deciding the key issues and questions you will want to investigate. The next key step is to do this, and this includes issues and questions internal to your group. Organizational capacity or group processes. How well are you working together in relation to the following? Needed resources, which could be human, financial, technical, leadership and vision and management. That is, whether are we clear about the aims of M&E, objectives, roles, responsibilities, adaptability, cost effectiveness and sustainability. Second, joint working. How well are you working with others? For example, in relation to partnerships, the wider movement, alliances, coalitions, disseminating or sharing good practice and techniques. Relevance and acceptability. How relevant are your projects to different demographic sections of the community? Effectiveness. Are you achieving your objectives? Impact. What is the impact of your project on people's life? For example, in relation to the ultimate changes in the lives of people or the environment. Contribution and attribution. What contribution have you made to outcomes and impacts? You will need to decide whether or not to monitor or evaluate all of these questions or just some. This is likely to require balancing information needs with available resources. Fourth, clarifying your aims, objectives, activities and pathways to change. In order to assess progress, you need to know what you are trying to achieve and how. That is, what are your aims, objectives and planned activities. In the following table, we will see how the key concepts of aim, etc. are defined and what their respective examples are. If the concept is aims, we will define it as the final impact on people's lives or the environment that you need to achieve. For example, to reduce our individual and community carbon emissions and contribution to climate change, our aim could be to contribute to a fairer, more prosperous and sustainable community environment. The objectives to achieve this aim would be the next step, and the example of that is to increase personal agency, to encourage more sustainable behaviors, to increase community resilience. The outputs for this objective would be to engage the participants of the project, to give them training, to plant some amount of trees and facilitate swapping of the trees at a break and take event. Now, to achieve these outputs, what are the activities that we need? The example is, for this particular aim, the activities required would be awareness raising, learning groups of household energy uses, lifestyles, community, food, transportation, sharing and reduction of waste. To achieve these activities, what are the inputs required? Now, these inputs by definition are the key human, financial, technical, organizational or social resources that you need to undertake in your activities. For example, voluntary capacity and availability, access to IT and other online resources, fundraising and availability of funds. This above matrix provides insight into the pathway to change. This describes how your project activities will contribute to your desired outcomes and hence to your objectives, which will in turn contribute to your final impacts or your aims. In a very simplified manner, this chain looks like given here in this visual. Input leads to activity, activity leads to output, output leads to outcome and outcome leads to impact. Mapping out your change pathway and identifying your change assumption can help you work out what contribution you can make and what contribution other actors need to make. Identifying what information you need to collect. Generally, you are likely to need information to track and assess what has changed, understand the reasons for change, interpret the changes. The information you collect might either be quantitative or qualitative. What are the indicators? The indicators of change are those changes resulting from your program or projects which you need to implement. These are specific and concrete pieces of information that enable you to track the changes you are trying to achieve. For example, if you want to see change in attitude regarding sun preference in your community, you may use gender ratio as an indicator for which you will try to find out the number and gender of children in the households in your community. Sixth, deciding how you will collect the information. We try to find out information by either internal or external sources. Internal monitoring is when you need to work out how you will collect the information and what your methods of information collection will be, such as timelines, mapping, diagrams or other diagnostic tools. Some useful information collection methods for internal monitoring include internal records to track project activities, periodic group workshops, discussions, periodic surveys, use of automated household or community tools. Evaluations. You can either conduct your own evaluations or commission an independent external person to do it for you. Seventh, assessing your contribution and influence. Your M&E may show positive outcomes and impacts associated with your projects and programs, but these may be attributable to other factors or actors rather than your program or project. Therefore, it is important part of M&E to assess the influence or contribution of your project which has come from your project activities and has made that impact. For this, we could have retrospective assessments, which can be done by selecting a random sample of people both from a project area or a control group community area retrospectively. Another alternative is to periodically commission an independent evaluator or facilitator to explore your contribution, to observe outcomes and impacts such as those through focus groups, group workshops, interviews, etc. Some of the questions you might want to ask include: what changes have been there in the recent years on a particular issue? Who were the key actors driving or blocking these changes? What were the key contextual factors driving or blocking these changes? What contribution has Y organization or project made to these changes? How influential has Y been compared to others, and why? What value added do you think Y brought to the issue? Eighth, analyzing and using the information. A key purpose of monitoring is to support internal decision making and planning. So, you need to ensure periodically analyze, assess and actually use the information you collect. This can be done by analyzing the information collected and then communicating the data for internal learning and learning for other stakeholders. For internal learning, we need to find out what is working well and not so well and why. What have we learned about how to achieve change? How plausible were our change assumptions? What changes do we need to make in our change strategy, understanding of change and ways of working? Learning for other stakeholders. What are the lessons for other practitioners, for example, other communities, local authorities, intermediaries, etc.? What are the lessons for national policy? Finally, you need to communicate the data. Depending on the purpose of your M&E, it is important to communicate data to your relevant stakeholders. This would involve deciding the key audience, tailoring and packaging the data to key stakeholders or audiences, converting data into graphs, pie charts, etc., drawing out key lessons for the key stakeholders. Last but not the least, we must take care of ethics. It is very important that you gain informed consent from research, respondents, participants and ensure their anonymity in the communication for research findings and respect data protection laws. Community engagement and monitoring. In the Indian context, community engagement in monitoring is done through a participatory means, which you will study in detail in the module on PRA. However, in this module, we shall study participatory monitoring. According to Amitav Mukherjee, participatory monitoring is a systematic recording and periodic analysis of information that has been chosen and recorded with the help of outsiders. The main idea behind this is to get information about a task, project or program when it is ongoing, so that any changes or adaptations required may be made so that the objectives of the project may be achieved. We may now list the salient features of participatory monitoring as follows. Number 1, it measures progress. Number 2, provides information for decision makers. Number 3, analyzes information periodically. Number 4, requires that there be agreement on objectives and activities. Number 5, terms or indicators or tools of measurement are chosen by insiders. Number 6, broadly examines progress of the project or program towards the objectives and activities. Advantages of participatory monitoring. According to Mukherjee, these advantages are: number 1, it provides ongoing picture, early detection of problems and solutions, helps to drive towards maintenance of good standards through continuous feedback, ensures effective utilization of resources, provides complete picture of the project, creates informal base for future evaluations. Now, what are the steps in participatory monitoring? These are: number 1, discuss reasons for monitoring, review objectives and activities, develop monitoring questions, establish direct and indirect indicators, decide which information gathering tool is to be used. For example, community environment survey, survival survey, farmers record book, nursery record book, tehsildar's record book, panchayat account book, etc. Decide the monitor, that is, who will do the monitoring, that is, identify the community member responsible. Finally, analyze and present the results. Community engagement and evaluation. Just as we saw in the case of participatory monitoring, the engagement of community in evaluation is called participatory evaluation. Amitav Mukherjee defines it as an opportunity for both outsiders and insiders to stop and reflect on the past in order to make decisions about the future. In participatory evaluation, insiders are supported by outsiders to take responsibility and control of planning. What is to be evaluated? How is it to be evaluated? How is it to be analyzed? And presentation of the results. Salient features of participatory evaluation are as follows. Number 1, insiders evaluate the task, project or program. Outsiders facilitate participatory evaluation. Evaluation information serves as a guide for decision taking, and both objectives and activities are considered while evaluating. What are the advantages of participatory evaluation? According to Amitav Mukherjee, these are: number 1, better decision making by insiders. Evaluation skills of insiders need to be developed. Outsiders develop better understanding of insiders. Insider to insider communication becomes stronger. Information gathered in the evaluation is useful for monitoring the project or program and provides an entry point for the participatory approach. So, why and when of participatory evaluation? Number 1, to achieve planned objective, to overcome a crisis, to overcome a problem that has become apparent, and finally to introduce the participatory approach into the community. Steps in participatory evaluation: review the objectives and activities, review the reasons for evaluation, develop evaluation questions, decide who will do the evaluation, identify direct and indirect indicators, identify the information sources for evaluation questions, determine the skills and labor that is required to obtain the information, determine when information gathering and analysis can be done, determine who will gather information, analyze and present the results. Steps for analysis of information: review the questions, organize the information, decide how to analyze the information, then analyze quantitative information using tally sheets or summary sheets, analyze qualitative information, and then integrate both the qualitative and quantitative informations. Evaluation result receivers. Who are the people who will receive the results of this evaluation? These are the project beneficiaries, community, other communities, and the project staff. Apart from these, donors, general public, and research and training organizations. Now, what should be the guidelines for presentation of results? The results should be interesting, understandable, convincing, timely, and participatory. Finally, the results should be presented in such a manner that the users or consumers of those results find them useful, interesting, and appropriate. Tools of monitoring and evaluation. Tools of participatory approach to monitoring and evaluation are those instruments which help to gather, collate, analyze and present information in a way that is participatory and relevant. These tools should be appropriate for the project, stakeholder, objectives and activities in hand. The various tools that can be used in participatory monitoring and evaluation are as follows. Number 1, group meetings. Number 2, drawing and discussion. Number 3, murals and posters. Number 4, flannel boards. Number 5, open-ended stories. Number 6, unserialized posters. Number 7, community case study. Number 8, historical mapping. Number 9, semi-structured interview. Number 10, ranking, rating, sorting. Number 11, community environment assessment. Number 12, survival surveys. Number 13, participatory action research. Number 14, maps and mapping. 15, farmers on record. 16, nursery record. 17, community financial accounts. Number 18, strength, weakness, opportunity and constraint analysis, that is SWOT analysis. 19, popular theatre. 20, puppet theatre. 21, community directed visual images. 22, community directed audio recordings. 23, community directed video. The various references given can be assessed by learners to see the case studies and templates of the various tools listed above. Summary. In these modules, we have learned about monitoring and evaluation. In India, monitoring and evaluation done with community engagement is referred to as participatory approach to monitoring and evaluation. The various steps, advantages, essentials and tools of participatory monitoring and evaluation have been discussed. One can conclude that the participatory approach to monitoring and evaluation converts the beneficiary into an active participant in the development process by empowering her to access the programs of her community development. Thank you.